there is so much drama, which might all exist around the text messages, the information that Blake may have shared with her bestie, Taylor Swift. This information could be the end of Blake Lively. It could be a nothing burger, but it could be the end of Blake Lively as far as this case is concerned.
It created headlines when Baldoni's now dismissed lawsuit brought up Blake Lively's friend Taylor Swift. Swift was subpoenaed when text exchanges between Baldoni and Lively were revealed to include the name Taylor. Swift's representative says she was not involved in the movie in any way beyond licensing one song for the film. And at the time, you slammed Baldoni's team for bringing Taylor Swift into this.
Blake Lively, once poised as both star and executive presence on the set of It Ends With Us, a film surrounded by sky-high expectations and industry backing, is now seemingly cornered. Once heralded as a fixture of both prestige and pop culture, Lively now appears to be in strategic retreat, scrambling to prevent key pieces of information from reaching the hands of her legal opponent, Justin Baldoni. In a formal filing submitted to the United States District Court for the Southern District of New York, Lively's legal team made an urgent plea for a protective order that would stop Baldoni's attorneys from accessing a specific set of records, her private communications with Taylor Swift.
Baldoni's team subpoenaed Taylor Swift. They wanted Taylor Swift to, produce documents and release her texts, at least those between Taylor and Blake Lively. And Taylor's team objected, and then some other stuff happened, which I'm going to get to.
This is not a routine legal defense move. It's a targeted shield, hastily constructed and timed at a moment when discovery is closing in. The motion frames Baldoni's demands as overreaching, irrelevant, and fundamentally intrusive, painting them as an abuse of the discovery process. But strip away the legal terminology, and what emerges is something far more revealing: fear. The fear of what might be lurking in those messages. The fear of losing control over a narrative that once seemed bulletproof. And most of all, the fear that if those texts reach the courtroom, they won't just damage Blake Lively's case. They could unravel it entirely.
How did that impact your client?
Yeah, Jake, it's no accident that they brought her into this. The scenario planning document I mentioned from August of 2024 mentions one of the things they planned to do was to plant stories discussing the weaponization of feminism, including how people in Blake Lively's circle, specifically Taylor Swift, have been accused of weaponizing feminism to bully people.
Because at this stage, it's not about whether Taylor Swift is involved in the legal matter. It's about how deeply and how dangerously her name is embedded in the digital trail Lively is now desperate to keep hidden. While the court motion is cloaked in the language of privacy and principle, its heartbeat is unmistakably panic. The legal jargon insists this is about safeguarding celebrity correspondence from public consumption, but to those familiar with litigation strategy, the real story is harder to ignore. If the text messages between Blake Lively and Taylor Swift were truly harmless, procedural, or irrelevant,
the high-paid attorneys tell her new bestie, Judge Lyman, quote, Blake Lively respectfully submits this letter motion for a protective order regarding the Wayfarer party's continuing demands for Miss Lively's communications with Taylor Swift.
There would be no need for such a forceful legal barricade. Instead, what's unfolding is a frantic effort to keep something buried. And that urgency coincides with a dramatic shift in Lively's legal posture. In a sudden and telling maneuver, court records from the Southern District of New York confirm that Lively has voluntarily withdrawn two of the most emotionally charged claims in her case: intentional infliction of emotional distress and negligent infliction of emotional distress. These aren't minor footnotes, they were the core of her narrative, anchoring the idea that Baldoni's actions caused her profound psychological harm.
Whoa, things just got real because Brian Friedman, Justin Baldoni's attorney, just accused Blake Lively of witness tampering and trying to destroy evidence by making Taylor Swift delete her text messages. He also claims Blake threatened Taylor and said if she doesn't release a statement in support of her, then somehow Taylor Swift's private text messages will be leaked.
By dropping them, she has not only weakened her overall case, she has also removed the need to provide supporting evidence that might have required her to hand over those very same text messages. It's not just a legal recalibration, It's a retreat under pressure, timed precisely as her attorneys began moving to seal off all access to her conversations with Swift. The implication is chilling. Whatever those messages contain, they may be far more damaging than any public accusation. And the fact that she's now fighting to keep them secret while simultaneously abandoning her emotional claims suggests she'd rather dismantle part of her case than risk exposing what was really said behind closed doors.
But the long and the short of it is, back to Brian Friedman. He withdrew the subpoena for Taylor Swift. And Taylor Swift's lawyers came out, a spokesperson said, "Oh, we're pleased that Baldoni's legal team has withdrawn their harassing subpoenas to Taylor Swift and her law firm. We supported the efforts of Taylor's team to quash these inappropriate subpoenas directed to her counsel, and we will continue to stand up for any third party."
The message, though never directly stated, echoes loudly through every legal filing and procedural pivot. Blake Lively cannot afford to have the court probe her mental and emotional condition, not because she lacks a case, but because the cost of justifying it might be catastrophic. To validate her now abandoned emotional distress claims, Lively would have been required to open the door to evidence, communications, statements, behaviors that could illustrate how deeply she was affected by Justin Baldoni's alleged conduct. But in that process, the court would also gain access to the very text messages between Lively and Taylor Swift that her legal team is now scrambling to keep sealed.
As part of a deal to withdraw their subpoenas to Miss Swift and her counsel. So if they did receive anything from Team Taylor, they want it, and they haven't gotten it.
What once may have been casual conversations between close friends have suddenly transformed into legal liabilities. Messages that may contain signs of manipulation, a coordinated attempt to control public perception, or even language that directly contradicts Lively's formal claims. These aren't just potential PR nightmares, they're time-stamped digital records that, in the context of a defamation and extortion lawsuit, could dismantle entire arguments. Worse still, if any of those messages have already been preserved in a discovery package, forwarded, copied, or cached by someone else, then Lively may have already lost control of them without knowing.
So this goes back to the Taylor Swift subpoena that Blake Lively and Ryan Reynolds were trying to quash, right? They're saying, don't subpoena her, she has nothing to do with this, right? And Taylor Swift was like, what? I didn't even see It Ends With Us until like weeks after it came out. And they wrote letters to the judge basically asking him to kill the subpoena, right?
The specter of that possibility is likely what prompted her team's aggressive push for a protective order. Because once the court begins to connect her dropped emotional claims with the sealed-off communication trail, the unspoken conclusion becomes difficult to ignore. She didn't drop those claims because they lacked merit. She dropped them because she couldn't defend them without risking exposure to something far more damaging. Adding another volatile layer to an already unraveling legal battle is the unexpected but increasingly undeniable presence of Taylor Swift. Though not named as a litigant, Swift's involvement is no longer hypothetical. Her name surfaces repeatedly in federal court filings tied to the case, pulled from the margins into the spotlight. What began as background noise has now become central to the story. According to detailed court records, Blake Lively allegedly kept Swift on speakerphone during the filming of It Ends With Us, not in private conversations but audibly, in the presence of cast and crew. Whether intentional or not, the implication is hard to ignore. Lively was broadcasting her proximity to Swift's immense cultural clout in a professional setting, using that relationship as a kind of social shield or influence amplifier. Buried within the procedural language of the filings, this detail doesn't just raise eyebrows, it casts a long shadow over Lively's credibility. In high-stakes celebrity litigation, where narrative control is everything, perception is currency. And in this case, it now appears that Lively may have leveraged her friendship with Swift as a strategic asset, one that now threatens to backfire. Because the tide has turned, Swift, according to recent court acknowledgments, has legally detached from the matter. More tellingly, she appears to be putting real distance between herself and Lively at a time when proximity would be most helpful. The optics are undeniable. A plaintiff who once flaunted a friendship for power and positioning is now being left alone to face the consequences. As the legal system begins to scrutinize not just her claims, but the intentions behind them, the emergence of Scott Swift, Taylor Swift's father, into the legal record has shifted the tone of this case from explosive to volatile. Court documents now confirm that Scott Swift provided information directly to Justin Baldoni's legal team, and not as a mere courtesy. The arrangement was structured through a deal that resulted in the withdrawal of subpoenas previously aimed at compelling Taylor Swift's direct involvement. In return, Scott turned over a cache of communications or context deemed valuable enough to satisfy discovery demands. Legally, it was a transactional compromise, but strategically, it sent a clear message Taylor Swift was drawing a hard boundary between herself and Blake Lively's legal warpath. The carefully crafted wording of the court's acknowledgement reveals a deeper truth. Taylor didn't just want to sidestep public testimony. She wanted to ensure there was no official thread tying her to the courtroom drama. No deposition, no witness statement, no sworn declaration. In legal terms, she is a ghost in the case, present in the facts but absent from responsibility. And that decision, now etched into the federal docket, throws Blake Lively's recent maneuvers into sharper relief. Her sudden effort to block the court from accessing any communications with Swift may appear, on the surface, like a gesture of loyalty. But beneath it lies a much more desperate reality, that what's at risk isn't just privacy, it's exposure. If those messages contain contradictions, power plays, or emotional manipulation tied to the allegations against Baldoni, then what's being protected isn't a friend. It's a crumbling defense built on a relationship that may already be dead. The emotional unraveling of Blake Lively's public and private defense may have reached its most damning moment, not with a courtroom outburst or a media leak, but with silence. Legal insiders familiar with the federal filings have confirmed what many had only speculated. Taylor Swift has gone completely dark. No messages, no phone calls, no digital footprint of continued support. What once was a high-profile friendship, amplified by red carpet appearances, social media tributes, and even godparenthood, has now collapsed into a void. And in the context of a federal case hinging on credibility, that void is deafening. If this communication blackout is verified under oath, it will not be dismissed as mere personal drift. It will be scrutinized as motive, evidence that Swift herself interpreted Blake's legal maneuvers not as necessary, but as manipulative. Worse, it would suggest that Swift saw her own name being weaponized in a lawsuit she never consented to be part of. That silence becomes more than awkward. It becomes an accusation. And in a courtroom where perception bleeds into fact, Swift's disengagement casts a long, damning shadow over every statement Lively has made on the record. As if the legal drama weren't already complex, a surprising and unconventional motion added yet another layer to the proceedings, this time calling for the removal of the presiding judge, Louis Lyman. The request was filed by Brett McDowell, known for his past work as Ryan Reynolds' body double and on-set stand-in, which gives the motion an unusual, almost theatrical twist. McDowell contends that Judge Lyman's impartiality could be compromised due to his brother's reported professional relationship with Blake Lively, Reynolds' wife, on various commercial ventures. This alleged connection, McDowell argues, represents a potential conflict of interest significant enough to question the judge's ability to remain unbiased. However, legal experts largely view this motion as a desperate gambit rather than a legitimate legal challenge. To most courtroom veterans, such filings are telltale signs of panic rather than strategy, characteristic of parties who sense the legal tide turning against them. These moves rarely surface in trials that are orderly and straightforward. Rather, they tend to erupt in high-stakes cases teetering on the edge of collapse, driven by litigants who feel cornered and are reaching for any available exit. In a notable development, recent court filings signed and submitted by Blake Lively's legal team reveal that the 10th and 11th causes of action, specifically her claims of emotional distress, have been voluntarily dismissed with prejudice. That legal phrase carries significant weight. When a claim is dismissed with prejudice, it means the plaintiff is barred from ever bringing that claim again in the future. It's not a pause or a temporary withdrawal, it's a permanent legal surrender. By taking this step, Lively has effectively closed the door on any opportunity to argue that she suffered psychological or emotional harm as a result of the events at the heart of the case. This decision may offer her a degree of protection, sparing her from the grueling and often invasive cross-examinations that come with mental health claims, interrogations that can delve into deeply personal and private aspects of one's life. However, this legal trade-off comes at a cost. By removing emotional distress from the equation, Lively's case loses a powerful, humanizing element, its emotional center. What remains is likely to be more clinical, less compelling, and perhaps less resonant in the eyes of a judge or jury. It's a move that suggests strategic recalibration, but also a recognition that certain battles may no longer be winnable. Now, the spotlight shifts to Justin Baldoni's legal team as the momentum of the case pivots in their direction. The pressure is mounting for them to decide how and whether they will leverage the materials already in their possession. Hidden within the latest round of filings is a key detail that could prove pivotal, a reference to specific documents that Baldoni's team has already acquired, not through a courtroom showdown, but as part of a strategic negotiation. These materials were obtained in exchange for the withdrawal of subpoenas previously aimed at Taylor Swift and her legal counsel, a quiet but telling move that suggests behind-the-scenes maneuvering and compromise. While Lively's legal team is now crying foul, alleging that these documents are being wielded in an unfair or prejudicial manner, their protests may carry little weight under federal procedural rules. In the eyes of the court, the primary concern is whether the evidence was obtained lawfully and falls within the proper scope of discovery. If it does, then the court is under no obligation to exclude it or shield any party from its potential impact. This sets the stage for a critical juncture. Baldoni's team now holds cards that could reshape the trajectory of the case, and how they choose to play them may determine what happens next in this increasingly volatile legal battle. If those documents, whether they be text messages, emails, call logs, or other forms of digital communication, contain content that directly contradicts Blake Lively's version of events, the consequences could be profound. In particular, if any of the materials undermine her allegations of manipulation, retaliation, or verbal coercion, they could fundamentally shift the foundation of her lawsuit. Such contradictions wouldn't merely weaken her legal position, they could dismantle the credibility of her entire narrative. Even a single message suggesting that the accusations against Justin Baldoni were not spontaneous expressions of harm, but instead strategically orchestrated, could prove devastating. In the realm of public opinion, the damage from that revelation would be swift and lasting. Lively's reputation, long associated with poise, authenticity, and moral clarity, could be irreparably tarnished. Legal ramifications aside, the cultural and professional consequences would likely follow her for years. In today's hyperconnected, relentlessly scrutinized media landscape, the court of public perception often delivers a harsher, more enduring verdict than any judge or jury. Should evidence emerge that casts doubt on the sincerity of her claims, Lively wouldn't just face legal setbacks. She'd risk a permanent fracture in the trust and admiration she has cultivated throughout her career. Hollywood's most glittering alliances are often held together by shared success, mutual admiration, and carefully curated public images. But when the pressure mounts, even these seemingly unbreakable bonds can crack, though rarely do they implode with the sheer visibility, intensity, and fallout we're witnessing here. In this case, the collapse of once closed ties has unfolded not just behind closed doors but in full view of the public, with every motion, filing, and whisper feeding a frenzy of speculation and scrutiny. What's more, the ultimate truth in this unraveling saga may not emerge from impassioned courtroom arguments or a judge's ruling from the bench. Instead, it could come from the cold, impartial trail left behind in the digital ether, screenshots of messages once exchanged in confidence, timestamps that tell a different story than the one recounted on the stand, and electronic receipts that endure long after personal relationships have disintegrated. These fragments of digital evidence, objective and immutable, may carry more weight than any verbal testimony. And then there's the silence, particularly from Taylor Swift. A close friend to both parties and someone whose influence could sway public sentiment, Swift's decision to remain publicly absent from the conversation is striking. In a landscape where every statement is dissected, her silence has become a statement in itself, one that, intentionally or not, echoes louder than anything yet said in court. The legal battle rages on, but the cultural reckoning, it seems, has already begun.